Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. This month is dedicated to films that are the wholesomest of the wholesome. In tonight's episode, we will be conversing on the poetry of Paterson. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back to Reels on the Rocks, everybody. The podcast where the movies are made up and the points don't matter. I'm Whiskey,
and I'm with my Sweet Tea.
Here with my trusty co-host. So, for this month-ish, like these, we're kind of month-ish. So this episode, we kind of wanted to do something a little more wholesome, especially after spooky month. Spooktober is over. So this is a film I wanted to talk about for a long time, pretty much since the inception of this podcast, but it felt like a good time to talk about it now.
I mean, it is like perfect for wholesome month. It really is.
The other thing I hadn't really, because we were like, wholesome was sort of the theme we were going for. What's interesting is this time last year we were doing experimental month, and one thing I do want to keep doing for this show is like kind of highlighting artsy directors, art house directors. And last year we did a Lars von Trier film. This year we're doing a Jim Jarmusch film. So before I start getting into it, what are you drinking, T?
So, I had a perfect metaphor for what the movie was, and I was going to do a beverage based on that. But then I'm like, wait, hold on. I want to save that for the next movie. So I decided to do kind of what our main character Paterson does in Paterson and have a nice cold beer, just
oh
to
my
relax.
Goodness. And you never drink beer, so that's interesting.
Well, it's a cider, but it's in a can. It's in a can. Look, I'm going to open it for y'all. Very ASMR like, if I can. There we go. Okay. It sprayed me a little bit. But
not quite as smooth as our opening.
No. That was done with a lot more space.
What kind of cider are you doing?
So I'm having the last of my Ace Perry craft cider. My last can. It's delicious. I had this for the first time in Savannah about a year ago, and I've loved it ever since.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I kind of had the same mindset as you, and I went through a bit of a loop-de-loop, like sort of trying to figure out, because obviously if you've seen the film, Paterson has kind of this routine of having a beer at the end of the night while walking his dog,
right?
And so at first I was like, okay, what beers are from New Jersey? And there were like 120 independent breweries, so it was a nightmare trying to find at Bevmo, like, because that's like the most diverse kind of liquor store around here. I'm going to try and shop around more because I couldn't find too many interesting things. But so obviously I was having trouble finding that. So then I was like, okay, what major beers are brewed in New Jersey? And of course, Anheuser-Busch was one that came up. So that would be Budweiser. And I'm like, ew, no, thank you. Yeah. So I just sort of wanted to stick to kind of local, smaller beers. So I spied while I was there some Scrimshaw, which if anyone listening hasn't tried it, I think is massively overrated. My sister turned me on to it, and it's brewed in Fort Bragg, California. And it's a great beer. I'm looking forward to tasting it in a second after I stop talking about it, but it's a nice...
Why don't you describe the can for our listeners?
Well, it's a bottle. You think I'm not an animal this episode. It's a brown bottle. It's got a cool image of, like, I always thought it was a sail, but now it's like a tooth with like a whale on it. It's got another thing that I think I've mentioned in the past is I'm a big sucker for like maritime things, nautical nonsense, big SpongeBob fan. So anything like seafaring themed, I'm a big fan of. So, it's got that theme.
So listeners, if any of you wants to be, Whiskey's weird stalker, he'd love a yacht. He would love you forever.
Yeah, man. If any sugar mamas out there want to buy me a boat, I'll do it, man. I eat ass. No.
Oh my god. Okay.
All right, so let's get into the boring stuff first. So,
Oh, first off, because this movie was just so relaxing, I'm going to go ahead and set the mood for this. I'm going to go ahead and light some
oh
candles.
yeah,
I'm going to light some candles over here, just if I can. Whoa, there we go. Okay. And then we're just going to light some candles. I just needed to really create the mood here because that's kind of how this movie left me feeling. All right, so we got some candles. We have some nice beverages going. Now go ahead. Give us
all right. So,
all the
the
info.
boring stuff. The boring stuff. So the film's called Paterson, in case you couldn't read our title. It was released on December 28th, 2016. Its budget was $5 million, and its gross was estimated to be about $9.5 million. So not too crazy. It was actually filmed in Paterson, New Jersey. It stars Adam Driver as the titular Paterson. Gulshife Farahani, I'm probably botching that, but that is the co-star who's Paterson's wife, Laura.
Okay.
And there's like a couple other stars, but the other one I thought mentioning was Nellie as the dog Marvin, which is interesting because it's like, wait, is that a woman dog playing a man dog?
Dogs can be passing both ways. That is one of, I guess,
exactly.
the gifts.
I mean, hey, we're all for that kind of thing here. Let's get more trans actors and all that stuff. But I just thought that was funny because I don't know. I was like, why? And also, it's funny. Like, I guess it's written in the script, but it's like with dogs that aren't like a massive part of the story. It's like, why not just call the dog Nellie if that's the dog's name? Whatever. Actor dogs, maybe it confuses them.
I don't. Maybe the name Marvin was symbolic, and we just haven't caught on to it yet.
Maybe. I was looking into that sort of thing. So the thing you gotta get about Jim Jarmusch, who is the writer and director, although one other interesting thing I noticed while looking at this is that he's not the only writer. All of the poems that Paterson writes in the film are written by real poems. In fact, so Jim Jarmusch wrote the little girl's poem.
Okay.
But William Charles Williams, which you'll remember is Paterson's favorite poet from Paterson, who is also a real person from Paterson, wrote the poem, This Is Just to Say. And then Ron Paget.
I think it's is it Padget?
Padgett.
Okay, I think it's Paget.
Paget, I think. Yeah, Paget. So he wrote everything else. So he wrote Love, Poem, Glow, Poem, and Pumpkin. So, like, Jim Jarmusch and William Carlos Williams wrote 2 of the poems, and then Ron Paget wrote everything else, poem-wise, which I thought was kind of interesting. I've seen this movie now 3 times, and I didn't, because I don't always dive into the credits always or whatever, but I did not know that different people wrote all the different poems that Paterson's writing. So that was cool.
So is William Carlos Williams, is he like actually a famous poet, or is he just like a poet and like they kind of just used his name and built his lore in the movie?
So we'll be getting into that. The first thing, as I said, like kind of this is almost sort of a spiritual successor to last year's film, where it was almost more of a director profile. We definitely did review the film by Lars von Trier, but as I said, it's kind of like we have a lot of fun here, but I do like to kind of look at some of the more obscure films that big hipsters like to get into. And in the world of art film, Jim Jarmusch is one of the big boys, and he is interesting because I've mentioned this with David Lynch, Terrence Malick, and even Lars von Trier. One thing that's kind of interesting about art directors is they don't come, or art house directors, I should say, is they don't come from film background. Like, for instance, Terrence Malick, he got his undergraduate in philosophy. Lars von Trier is just a weirdo who grew up on a nudist colony. So, like, I guess he did go to film school, but he kind of went in with this weird sort of experimental sort of mentality to it.
Wait, isn't Lars von Trier the one that feels the need to, when he gets stressed, he starts undressing on set?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And he's who we talked about last year with Dogville. And then, of course, David Lynch, who's one of my favorites, he started out as a painter. He got his undergraduate degree in visual arts and I believe the University of Philadelphia. I'm probably there's a big university in Philadelphia that he studied at, and then he ended up going to AFI. Then he went to AFI. But again, like one thing I think that's kind of interesting is when you go to film school, there's sort of a commercial background to what you're doing. It's like you are learning how to make films as an industry, like as to make money, but they come from completely different backgrounds and perspectives, and so they're not really about that. They're about the art of it. You know what I mean? Like David Lynch is a painter, and his films are very surreal, so he is very into the visual aspect of it. I'd say
Right.
his dialogue is kind of weird sounding, often like maybe not very realistic. And I think that's because he comes at it from the visual perspective. Terrence Malick, on the other hand, since he's into philosophy, his films are very long. They're very like high concept. He's got a lot of weird crap going on, and he also likes to kind of have, yeah, like it's like for instance, like Badlands or the Book of Life and stuff like that. They're very like they're not hard concepts to grasp, but they're almost aimless. I don't know. Like maybe we'll maybe we'll go into a Terrence Malick film next year. But so Jim Jarmusch's background is in literature. He's from Akron, Ohio. He moved to New York City when he was 17 and ended up getting his undergraduate degree from Columbia University in 1975 for literature. Then he was accepted into NYU's Tisch School for, filmmaking. They're the art school, but he...
Oh, so was I.
Yeah, right. So he had no background in filmmaking, and he went there. Right. So if David Lynch is into painting, Terrence Malick's into philosophy, and Lars von Trier's into getting naked on set,
which
Jim
I'm
Jarmusch,
so surprised no one's brought a lawsuit about that. But okay, we continue.
He's nice to his actors. I mean, it kind of, again, I think we talked about this last year, but with Lars von Trier, there was like
it's
really
kind of like
funny
what you're getting into, though.
Mostly, like, again, so I think I brought this up in that review, but one kind of funny moment with him was at a press conference for Melancholia. He had I don't know even why he brought this up, but at one point there's like a soundbite of him saying he understands what Hitler was thinking, and that made a lot of people really angry. But then Kirsten Dunst came to his defense, and she's like, I know what he said is stupid, but like you can't. So I don't know, like his actors defend him. I when I was doing research for that film last year, there's no accounts of anyone being like deeply traumatized from his shoot. So he's a weird guy, but he's not a monster from what everyone says. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know him personally. He'd probably be fun to go out drinking with.
You might end up looking at something you don't want to.
We'll see. Right? I might end up starring in one of his movies. Oh, man. So Jim Jarmusch, so his background's in literature. He went to Tisch. And his whole kind of outlook, so his strengths, I would say, are not visual. So like when the reason I said earlier when you're like, oh, maybe that's metaphorical or anything, at least from my understanding, his films aren't really something that have a lot of visual metaphor, at least not in the traditional sense of like, like other filmmakers, like, copying famous paintings, or like, for instance, I watched this with my sister while I was visiting family. Like for Halloween, both T and I were out of town, and I went home for a while. So I was watching this with my sister, who is a pretty skilled artist. And so one thing she noticed was there was a lot of black and white patterns, a lot of squiggly lines and circles. And she was like, I wonder if that means something. And it's possible. It is possible. I couldn't find him talking about that anywhere in my research. So just like I always say, the director's intent with what the film is a perfectly good context to go off of.
Yeah.
But if you discern some kind of meaning out of patterns or whatever, I forgot what you were saying you thought might be metaphorical for something.
Oh, Nellie's dog. You're like, why didn't they just call her Nellie? Why'd they call her Marvin?
Yeah, right. Maybe it's metaphorical. But yeah, like the thing about Jim Jarmusch is his strong suit is the dialogue, at least in my opinion. Even when it doesn't necessarily feel naturalistic, it feels intentional. And I think that comes from his background in literature. And then the other thing about his movies is you kind of take them as they are. He has a very big love for small town Americana. Like a lot of his past films, I wrote a few of them down: Dead Man, Down by Law, Coffee and Cigarettes, and Ghost Dog. Ghost Dog's interesting. It's a movie about a hip hop samurai who is a killer for the mob, because that's another interesting thing, and he kind of talks about it in an interview I read about this film. Like, as I said, he's really into like the everyday man,
Right.
and to him, like, hip hop is actually a kind of poetry, and there's even a scene in this movie. So like the school of poetry which he's most interested is, let me see where I can find. So it's based on the New York School. Let me see. I guess I didn't write that down, but it's based on right. Oh no, the New York School of Poetry. So the poets that are his favorites are John Ashbery and Frank O'Hara, and they also came from Tisch. And their whole thing, as he puts it in the interview, is that it's not about standing on the mountaintops proclaiming something to the world. It's about having a conversation with one other person. So New York School poets are often kind of stating their feelings in a very like honest and open way, but not in this like very theatrical and overstated kind of thing. And that's what he was interested in when he was studying literature. And even in the interview, he says that he goes about his films that way. It's not so like he doesn't intend for them to be big blockbuster hits. He just wants it to be like having a conversation with a single other person.
Right.
And so that's kind of, and to answer your previous question, you asked if William Carlos Williams is a real person. Yes, he is. And as I said, he's the character Paterson's favorite poet from Paterson. They mention him in the movie. He was famously a physician, so he was a doctor who wrote poetry in his spare time. And all of these New York School poets had day jobs. None of them were like they were published authors, but that wasn't their profession. They all had other jobs. Like I'm sure it's lost in my paragraphs of notes here, but one other New York School poet was actually I believe, tour guide in the New York Museum of Natural History as a day job when he was writing poetry in his free time. So this film is actually kind of based on a book that William Carlos Williams wrote called Paterson. And Jim Jarmusch was like, so basically the book is like...
and that's the book the guy's reading at the end when he meets him, but he's reading it in Japanese.
Interesting.
It's actually that book. So I was like, wait, he had a book called Paterson?
Yeah, so William Carlos Williams wrote the book Paterson, and Jim Jarmusch read it and kind of got the idea for this movie. He went to Paterson 20 to 25 years ago and sort of wrote the treatment for this film. And he, as he says in the interview, like the book is not... William Carlos Williams isn't one of his favorite poems, and frankly, he said the book kind of went over his head a lot. But the book is sort of about this person being kind of a metaphor for the town and vice versa, the town being a metaphor for this person. And then he was like talking about how there's sort of this utopian vision of Paterson where the waterfall's powering the town. And it's sort of like this old school John Hamilton sort of utopian view of a small town in America. And so like he just had these vague ideas, wrote the treatment 20 to 25 years ago as of this interview, which was in Time magazine around the time this film came out. So now it's like 30-ish years ago, and he just couldn't do anything with it. But now, years and years later, by the way, this is his 13th feature, Lucky 13. He just sort of, he saw Adam Driver. He really liked his acting style. One thing I don't know if you know about Adam Driver or anyone listening is that he famously does not watch films that he stars in because he doesn't want to fixate on how he looks in the performance. Like he's very reactional. It's not so like I did watch an interview years ago where he says watching himself does make him uncomfortable, but that's not the main reason he does it. It's more that like he wants to react to his co-star. So he wants to be in the moment. So he doesn't want to be thinking too hard about like his physicality or like what, thing he was doing in a past scene or something. So he just doesn't want to bog his his mind down with that. If there's a problem, the director will tell him and everything like that. But Jim Jarmusch really liked him, and also really liked his acting style. And he also said, and I thought this was interesting, he sympathizes with actors because their job's so stressful, yet they basically have no control over the finished product. Like, they hand over their performance to the director and the editor, and they basically don't have any say in how they come across or anything like that. And so he said he has a lot of sympathy for actors, even to the point where when they throw big baby tantrums on set, he doesn't really get mad at them, because it's like, to him, he feels like they have one of the hardest jobs.
Right. I mean, that makes sense too, because what he said is exactly true. It's, they put in all this work and effort and everything, but they have no say in how it actually looks and turns out and is interpreted, at the end.
Yeah.
So that really, I can definitely agree with that.
The other thing that kind of played a role in how this film came out is, like, when they were getting ready to shoot, him and the location manager like went to Paterson, rode the bus a bunch, and like took photos and stuff. And one thing he really made clear was that this is not a real Paterson. This is like an idealized Paterson. This is like, the way he said the town is in real life is it's very rough. Like, there's a lot of, poor people. There's not really anything in the town worth living there for. So, as he put it, there's a lot of decay juxtaposed with beauty. When he was driving around, he said they would see like demolished or like rotting buildings next to a person painting their house.
Yeah.
While riding the bus, he mentions like a couple having like an angry fight on the street, and then just a few blocks over, there was a person giving their significant other flowers. So that was kind of something he wanted to integrate into the movie. And I already mentioned this, but one thing that he said that's a big part of his writing process is, like, he really likes, and he uses Dante from like the Divine Comedy, because even though that's, middle-aged poet from like the 1300s or whatever, like, he wrote in the vernacular, and that's something he really tries to have in his movies, which is why, in my opinion, I think the dialogue in his films is kind of the standout, because as I said, it feels intentional, and sometimes there are kind of weird ways people are talking, but it doesn't come off as unnatural.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like this is a good example of that, because like, there's times when Paterson's talking to his wife where it doesn't really feel like a lived-in relationship. Again, watching this with my sister, she wasn't even, and it's funny too, the person who was interviewing Jim Jarmusch in this thing like called Laura Paterson's wife. Good to know. I didn't know. Like, again, this is the third time I've seen this movie, and I just thought maybe they were boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, they never say they're married in the movie or anything. And my sister was like kind of convinced that they'd probably like just met or something, because like the way they talked to each other was kind of weird.
I was, clocking them as being married. There's just there was sort of a comfortable routine that's existing with them, that if you had just met, you're not really super comfortable having your daily routine. The fact that that she was just going about her day, making changes to the house, painting things or whatever, you kind of let me know that maybe they were more than just boyfriend and girlfriend. And I don't know, like I said, just the intimacy and the comfortability and the fact that there was a constant routine, to me made it feel very much like a married couple, even though it's never specifically said. And I did notice it's never actually said what they are, but that was by kind of just reading, I guess, the emotional or behavioral cues from the characters. That was kind of like my takeaway.
No, for sure. I felt like it was a long relationship. I didn't know if they were married or not. But again, this is why it's kind of sometimes fun to watch movies with other people, because maybe they'll pick up on something you didn't. And when I was like going to tell my sister, like, I think it's a longer relationship than that, I kind of thought about it for a second, and I was like, she's got a point. Like they're kind of, they talk weird to each other. I still thought it was like a long time relationship. And again, maybe the interviewer didn't even know and just said that in the article without asking or whatever. But like, I was like, nice to see that and be like, oh, okay, they are married.
They are
so
married.
The other
confirmed.
So I told you about this film, years ago, and I told you, like, this is one of my favorite films of 2016 because I really liked what I felt like was the message of the film. And one other interesting thing I took away from this interview was a little quote by, like, I normally don't do this, but I actually screenshot it, and I'm going to read what Jim Jarmusch said verbatim. So
go ahead.
What I felt like when I saw this film, I felt like this was maybe even kind of a good thing for young people to see, because to me, this has a very good statement about what it is to, like, be an artist and make art. Because nowadays with, the internet and everything, it's like it's the easiest it's ever been in history to publish your own work. But at the same time, there's almost kind of this external pressure to, like, succeed or go viral or whatever, like, oh, if you're a writer, well, how many people have read your stuff?
Right.
Like, there's, like, if you're expected as an artist to be successful, or else you're just a fake artist or something.
Right.
And
right.
This interviewer, and that's why I like this movie, is because it's just about a guy who doesn't have a glamorous job. He doesn't, have, like, a crazy life. He's not a published author or anything. He just writes poetry in his free time. And this is kind of one of those movies that I know normally you don't like very much, where there is no plot. It's just a day in the life kind of thing. There's no stakes necessarily. There's no overarching plot or anything. It's just about a guy who drives the bus and writes poetry. And it felt really refreshing, because my one personal belief I hold is that everyone should have some kind of creative outlet or an art that they do, whether it's painting, whether it's throwing pottery, whether it's dancing, writing, whatever. Like,
what if it's murdering
most people? Hey man, what is this? The Ryan Murphy fan club?
I thought you were gonna say the houses that Jack built.
Right? No, but I do think it's something that would help just most people, like, be more, maybe even mentally healthy, if they just had kind of an escape where they there's nothing more proud for a person than, like, making something. I don't know how many people listen to this podcast all the time, but it is fun to do. And I don't know if you feel the same way, T, but whenever we put out an episode, I do feel a little bit of pride, that we did something. We filled an hour and a half of airtime with us yammering on about something hopefully interesting. But so I screenshot this because disclaimer, you should never go into a movie feeling like you need to be proven right by the director saying what you thought was the message. This was just my interpretation, and I found it interesting that apparently it was kind of the director's intent to have this, because in this interview, the interviewee asks Jim Jarmusch, like, what do you think about this new age of social media and making art and, had posting online and going viral, pretty much all of the same stuff I was thinking about when I saw this movie. And this is what Jim Jarmusch said. I think you can only trust yourself or those you're collaborating with. As soon as you step outside of that and start imagining how will the world receive this, you've lost your strength. You only have your own intuition. I've always said from the first films I ever made that those of us making the film, we were making it for ourselves. When I was very young, I was on a TV show in Holland with Bernardo Bertolucci, whom I deeply admire, a fantastic contributor to the history and beauty of cinema. But he got mad at me. He said, "You say you make films for yourself. I think that's reprehensible. Then you are an elitist, and you are not thinking about the world that you're supposed to be making the film for." I was kind of upset because this was someone I really respected, but I held my ground and said, no, I don't agree. I'm not trying to make a statement to the world. I'm trying to express something that those of us making the film feel. So I thought that was very impactful, and I, again, definitely vindicated my feelings about the film, but also kind of ties into an ongoing theme in our podcast about pretentious people. And it's, again, here we have this, like, supposedly snooty artistic director getting talked down to by Bertolucci about how selfish he's being for having a message, for having some kind of intention in his film that's personal. How dare you? How dare you? Don't you?
I mean, personal intention, throw it away.
But I mean, like, I'm wondering how you feel about that, because you often talk about how film bros, will talk down about, like, if if the film isn't, like, especially meaningful to them, or they feel like it doesn't contribute anything meaningful to the zeitgeist. And so I'm like, hearing that from Jim Jarmusch, what do you think about him and his experience with Bernardo Bertolucci?
Well, first off, if that had been me, I would have been devastated. I would have tried to hold my own. I probably wouldn't have been able to, especially if somebody I looked up to. I would have been devastated. Um, but I really do admire him for sticking to what he holds true. He creates art. People create art for all kinds of different reasons. But I do think that he is right in that the most pure form of art comes from when you're doing it for yourself, and it not in like a and not in like a selfish way, not for like profit or fame for yourself, but for you know uh for some sort of emotional artistic release or something, so that you get some sort of personal fulfillment out of doing it. And the fact that that's what he does, I think that came across very well, very much so in this movie. And I think that was kind of almost like the point of the movie. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I've been nagging you to see this film for years, and now that you've finally seen it, and now that I've kind of gotten through all of the background information about Jarmusch and everything, it's finally time to actually talk about the film. So, what did you think? Have I oversold it? What are your feelings about the film?
So I'm gonna do my usual. What do you think I felt? No, I'm just kidding. So I saw this.
How how dare you, Whiskey?
How dare you?
How dare you ask me a direct question?
What is that even about? I saw this for the first time, and it was almost like the perfect setting for this. And this is one of the reasons why I got out the candles and everything for this, because to me, this movie really is like a warm cup of tea. It's so soothing. It's so nice. It's so, I guess refreshing isn't the right word, but there's something that's just spiritually calming about this movie. And so I was watching this. I was watching it on my phone, but I was in my bed. I had, my blankets and stuff all wrapped around me. I was nice and snug. And I had, my scented candles, courtesy of Sarah Jessica Parker, filling the room with an aroma. And it was just like the most pleasant viewing experience I've ever had. And just watching it, it was like I did not know this man like at all, but he kind of felt like a friend. Like I want to be friends with this guy. And it was just such, I guess the word is, I don't know, it was just such like a happy movie, not like a, over the top happy, but it was just such like a baseline satisfied movie. And like you're right, I normally don't like what are they called? Like I call day in the life movies, especially when like I don't know. Anytime I've watched them, or slice of life or whatever they're called, I'm like I kind of just feel like what was the point? And maybe this one because I kind of got the point, or I sympathized with the character, or I felt something the film was putting out. I really enjoyed this film. I actually had to put it down and come back to it later because of life, but I could not wait to get back to this film and see how this all plays out, if anything more is going to happen. It's kind of like, it's almost like this was like wholesome reality TV or something like that. But I loved his character. I loved, I'm gonna call her the wife. According to Wikipedia's thing, she is the wife. She sounded a lot like Salma Hayek in some scenes, so I was like, is that Salma Hayek?
No. I botched her name, but I'll try it again. It's Gulshife Farahani, and she's done a few things. Like she's also a writer, and they say composer, but she did like vocals for a song and a short.
Yeah.
But she's been doing well for herself. She was in the fifth Pirates of the Caribbean movie. So
oh wow.
My condolences to the trauma you must have gone through on that piece of crap. But
calm down, people enjoyed it. You're
who?
like, did they though? Did they?
No, I don't think. We'll who knows? But she's cool. I like her. I'd like to see her more stuff. And she was really good in this part. But yeah, that was, you kind of already anticipated what I was going to ask, because I know, like, what are some, because the one you always say you really didn't like was Roma, but like what are some other day in the life movies, because I'm blanking on some other kind of like where there's no plot, or but like can you think of any that stand out that like are the opposite of this besides Roma, that like are kind of, because now I'm trying to
Okay,
think
so
what.
there's a lot of them that I had to watch in film school. This is how you don't like them. And there was one that stands out to me. We watched it in that class that you and I both hated that we took at the same time. I don't know. It was in a foreign language, and it was called like the Teddy Bear or something like this. And it was like this muscular guy, I don't know, living his life, and like nothing happens. And I was kind of just like, so anybody else feel like this? And I was like, this is, to me, this is kind of like a big why even bother movie.
What class were we both in that I hated? Because I feel like the only one we were in together film wise was screenwriting.
Intro, just it was called storytelling.
Yeah, but we didn't have to watch the teddy bear that I know
okay.
of.
So that was something that just my discussion session had to watch. But yeah, my TA did not
yeah,
like
no,
that I was like that.
That makes sense.
But
Yeah.
Ever since I've had to watch them in class, I was kind of just like, okay, Anne, because my big question has always been sort of when these are made, that usually when we've talked about them in class, there's usually some point or message or something they want to tell the world about this. And I was kind of always like, why is this guy's life like worthy, or this person or this woman's life worthy of of a short or a movie or something like this? And usually they can never really answer my question as to why this specific person. They usually just try to make a point about something. But this case, the fact that there really wasn't a reason why this particular person, and I do think that even before you told me that, the movie kind of, goes into that. I mean, not goes into it. They don't like talk about. I mean, they kind of thematically talk about it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But
I kind of get what you mean.
Yeah.
Like because I've felt like your phrasing with that when you've explained it to me before was like harsh, like, oh, because I mean it almost is kind of like saying that to like a real person, like, oh, why does your story matter, sir, Mister Mister Convenience Store clerk? Why should I care about why your wife's divorcing you? You piece of shit. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well, first off,
I don't
Clerks
know.
had a
Always,
plot. Okay.
well, so here's because this is some harsh wording from me that I always kind of say. I've used it to talk about remakes or reboots, and I do think it kind of applies to the whole not having a plot type movie. And my harsh wording would be that the film needs to justify its existence.
Yeah.
You and I feel differently about Roma, but I feel like that film justifies its existence from just kind of emotionally connecting with this woman in this really like difficult situation during a politically turbulent time in her country. Like, and so by the end of that film, I was like really emotionally invested in everything that was going on. With this film, it's more of like catching a vibe. Like, again, nothing super dramatic happens in this. The closest is a non-bar shooting.
Oh my god. That caught me off guard. Was not expecting it. Pulled gun. Whoa.
Right. I think my favorite part of that scene is he's like, nobody move, and then the entire bar clears out.
Right.
Everybody
runs.
Just nobody listens to him. Just, oh shit, and like leaves. No, but like, yeah, there's no stakes. There's no like. Pretty much the closest thing to a story is that, and the closest thing to a conflict is that Paterson's wife is also an artist, but she's very out. She is the sort of person who posts every 20 minutes on Instagram. Like,
right.
Like, and there's nothing wrong with that, but like, as far as a conflict in the movie, it's much more of like a psychic conflict. They're the same type of person, but one is very ostentatious and wanting to put themselves out there, and then the other is much more introverted. Yeah. And the ticking clock we get the first day of the film is she says, I want you to publish or like put out, make copies of your poems. I want you to somehow like publish them or get them out there. And I want you to do it on Saturday. And the film starts on a Monday.
Yeah.
So that kind of clued me in the film, like, okay, this is a week. And I think that also might have helped with the whole not having a plot, because you know how much time you are going to be in this man's life, like roughly a week. and again, like the term ticking clock is normally used for, like something will happen that will have consequences. And it's not like, oh my gosh, if he doesn't publish his poetry, she's going to divorce him. But, like you can kind of tell like he's going to do it because he loves her.
But yeah, but he
like,
doesn't want to.
Exactly. And so that's sort of the time span you get. And I think that helps in that regard, but it also, it also fills in with the whole routine theme in the film. Like every day you could break down to having like the same like 10 scenes roughly, like more or less, depending on what day it is. Like there's the cute bit of them lying in bed. He picks up his watch. They have breakfast, talk over stuff. He writes poetry on his way to work. He goes to the bus station, takes off. He, eavesdrops on some passengers, goes to the waterfall for lunch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of fall into that same pattern. And then there's like some goofy characters. I love how his boss at the bus depot, anytime he asks what's going on in his life, he just has this laundry list of terrible things.
I love this. He's like, well, I wasn't going to bother you with this, but
he was a big actor too. I didn't write his name down, but he's been in some things.
My favorite part was when we get to the day where he was like, not my favorite part, but when we get to the day where he's like, you know what, I'm not even going to tell you. Yeah, right? How bad must it be at that point for you to be like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother you with it for real.
I think appropriately that's also like the last day of the movie where he's at work.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so there's that. There's the couple who's fighting, and the guy just won't take the hint. There's the bartender who's always playing chess with himself, and he goes to chess tournaments. There's his wife. There's the dog Marvin, who is sort of the antagonist to the film, but not really. It's just a very cute bulldog, but Paterson doesn't exactly get along with him. It's almost like a begrudging relationship because it's his wife's dog. Like, okay, Marvin, we're going for a walk.
And
I'm getting my
it's
beer.
the other male in her life. So
I'm
just
might
saying.
be digging too deep. You're not wrong. I will say that when it came down to it, she definitely chose Paterson over the dog at the end of the movie.
Which that's good.
But
she's like, no, get him out of here. I like when he sits there and goes, I don't like you anymore, Marvin.
No, he doesn't say anymore. I think he just says, I don't like you, Marvin. Which, like, and that's part of the reason my sister thought that they hadn't been together for a very long time is, like, the relationship with the dog. It's like, if they were married, it's kind of like, why, like, weren't you involved in the decision to adopt the dog? Which, frankly, I doubt he would be. His wife seems to be the sort of person to just go off and do stuff when he's at work, so probably
just comes
not.
home, oh my god, look what I found at the farmer's market. Isn't it cute?
Oh my gosh. I found this stray bulldog, and he already has a collar on, but I cut it off because I want a bulldog.
She's not crazy. She wouldn't do that.
No, she's not. She's eccentric. She's definitely not crazy.
Now, I have a theory about this movie, and I want to see what you think.
Go for it.
Okay, so if you've ever watched any of the interviews with Guillermo del Toro for The Shape of Water, he talks about how people come up to him all the time and they're like, oh my god, the girl was so lonely or whatever. And he's like, she wasn't. She was the only character who wasn't lonely. And I'm kind of like, to me, it's very similar in this case. To me, Paterson's the only character that's truly happy in the movie. And I don't know if you felt the same way too.
I think his wife's happy.
Well,
like I said,
no,
to
she's
me,
always
they feel
chasing outside. She's always chasing like outside validation for her art. Like she doesn't want to just bake and sell cupcakes. It has to be the cupcakes that everybody loves, or that's going to get him out of there. Or she wants to learn so she can become a country star. She's chasing like outside validation, which is not, I'm not saying in like a toxic way, but there's something to see. But I feel like he's the only one that's truly content and truly happy with his life the way it is.
I think that's possible. It's hard to say because unless you spend more time with a character, like we know what she's doing throughout the day, but we don't really see her doing it. So we don't really get a sense of that in her performance, like we see her doing things throughout the day, but she seems kind of, lost in her work more or less. There's the day where she's painting all the curtains and stuff like that. And she doesn't really she's excited to see what he thinks, but that doesn't come off so much as like needing the validation. So I don't think that's wrong per se. It's just hard to really say for sure because you know what I mean. She doesn't. To me, I never really had a scene where she seemed like put out, because in fact, quite the contrary, the one time she does put herself out there, her cupcakes are a hit.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, but it's interesting because we don't get to see a scene where she fails at something,
Mm-hmm.
because that would really hammer in what you think about that. And frankly, it is kind of, I don't think you're wrong. It's just hard to say. And also, like, because we don't always focus on the creative endeavors of everybody else. Like, for instance, the bartender, he's into chess. He wants to compete in tournaments. And there's
Yeah,
the bit where his wife is.
But to do that, he has to steal money.
Yes, but that doesn't mean he's unhappy. You know what I mean? It's like he has to do that. I don't know. It's not a bad theory.
It's not a bad theory, but it's
just
something to chew on.
It is something to chew on. It's something that is going to be going through my head next time I see the film. And that's kind of the other thing about this is, if this is not the sort of movie that bores you, this is one that's very rewatchable, because it's, I never really picked up on the patterns of the circles and lines and black and white patterns like my sister did, and that's something I was thinking about when watching the movie that time, because she brought it up. And your reading of it, I'll probably be thinking of it going into it as well. But yeah, so the film is essentially just this routine. Different things happen on different days. There's kind of mini crises that arise, like the faux shooting at the bar. There's the day where his bus breaks down. There's the day where he meets the little girl. And that actually, first time I saw this film, I don't know if you got this, I was kind of worried that someone was going to think he was being a creep.
Yeah. There's a couple times where I thought, oh, okay, wait, something bad's going to happen here.
And that's something, I don't know if it's, because this is the first time you've seen this movie, I don't know if this got you, but like, it didn't bother me the first time I saw this film, but it almost made, like, so nothing really dramatic happens. Like, the closest thing is when the boyfriend brings the toy gun into the bar and tries to scare his girlfriend into going back together with him. But other than that, there's like nothing truly dramatic or like of having any kind of consequence really happens in the movie. And the first time I saw this film, there was constantly like this tension that something was going to happen. And the perfect example for me was like with that little girl. I was like, oh my God, the mom's going to like...
Right, the mom's come back and be like, oh, pervert.
And then even later, like, oh, that's going to come back later or something. And it never does. And it kind of, the first time I saw that...
Like the English dog when he's like,
yeah,
that's expensive. I'm like, and he just goes, my favorite part is he just leaves it outside again anyway.
Yeah, that's another perfect example. Yeah, he's going to get dog jacked. And then for the whole movie, I'm like, that's going to happen. And it never does. And by the time I finished this film, the first time I saw it, it kind of made me really like tune in to the fact it's like, man... mainstream media has really programmed me to expect crazy stuff to happen in movies. You know what I mean?
Maybe that's the point.
I kind of think it is. Because again, like we've talked about like setup and payoff on numerous occasions on this show. And this is almost like trolling the audience with the promise of setup and payoff.
You just got rickrolled by an art film.
Yeah, the only truly thing that gets paid off, which is hilarious, by the way, is when every day, at the end of the day, when Paterson comes home, the mailbox is slanted, and the whole time you're like, why? What is going on?
I love when we figure out what that is.
And it's, of course, Marvin just trying to get his goat or something. You know, it almost feels like Marvin's doing that to bother him, but it's a dog. Who knows?
Well, my favorite part is every day. This is one of the things that kind of sold me on he's the only character that's truly content. Every day he comes home, it's the same problem. He knows it's going to happen in the next day, but he still fixes it anyway.
Yeah. And, maybe you're right about it being intentional, because it's funny that the one thing of the least consequence, like the most mundane problem he faces every day, is the only thing that's paid off at the end of the film. Even though everyone who watches the movie is probably going to be like, why is the mailbox like that? It doesn't affect his life. It's just whatever. He moves it back every day. Whereas all these other things we were talking about, it's like, oh, Marvin's going to get dog napped, or, oh, he's going to get accused of being inappropriate with a little girl, or, oh, he's going to die in a bar shooting. Yeah. Like, none of that has any kind of, like, seriously, like, satisfying conclusion to it. But the dog moving the mailbox every day does. So maybe you're right about it being, like, an intentional troll on the audience and the idea of setup and payoff, especially in a movie where, like, it's supposed to be a slice of life. Like, why would you expect something crazy to happen?
Right.
But it really did, the first time I saw this movie, it really did make me think of how it's just like, why, like, it's because, you know, films are entertainment and you're expected to have something crazy happen in your movie. But it really just kind of shows how you're programmed to think that way when watching a movie. Because when I finished the movie, it's like I knew this was going to be kind of an artsy film, and I knew, you know, I'd seen at least one other Jim Jarmusch film before seeing this, so I kind of knew what he was about. And it just, again, by the end, I was like, why did I think anything was going to happen?
You know, to
But not
me,
in
it doesn't read like an art film, though.
well, and that's why I think doing this at least once a year is kind of useful, not just for anyone listening to us who might not be a part of that community or that kind of, you know, side of cinema, but also maybe for you, because again, like the idea of like an art house director is so broad.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the sort of pretentious jerks you see going on and on and on about genius filmmakers, like it really is like an ego stroking thing, because all of them come from different backgrounds. And again, that's what I find so interesting about art house directors, is that they don't come from a filmmaking background often. So they're not, you know, brainwashed by film school into having setup and payoff or like all these other things you learn in screenwriting 101.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it makes their films really refreshing, because you're just not, you know, it's like jazz. But
we're on the jazz.
But
man.
that's like, but that's the thing, like, you know, you, partly because of your experience with those types of annoying people, like you kind of have this idea of like, you know, artsy directors being like these pompous snobs.
Right, right.
Not really always the case. Like, I'm sure you actually felt probably pretty empathetic to Jim Jarmusch telling that story about Bertolucci.
Oh my God.
Because it's like,
yeah, like I said, I would have been devastated.
And the thing about Jim Jarmusch is, like I said, he's one of the big boys, like in the art, you know, like he is a famous director, even though his films do not make a lot of money or anything. He consistently has A-list celebrities in his film. One of his other films I've seen, Coffee and Cigarettes, Steve Buscemi plays like a bit part as a waiter. And that wasn't like, you know, and that wasn't even like early in his career. I think that movie came out in like 2003 or something like that. Right. So it's not like, you know, it's not like no one knows who he is. So it's, again, like you get a filmmaker like this who's very much just about like his personal feelings. And again, like I wasn't surprised to find out he's from Akron, Ohio, essentially the Midwest, because a lot of his films are concerned with just the everyday American.
Right. Like, I mean, and that makes sense. It's kind of like, that'd be like his bread and butter, you know, he grew up with certain issues and stuff. And so, you know, you become attracted to, and fascinated by and drawn to stories, you know, that affect that, you know, where we're raised on, where we are raised touches on a lot of what fascinates us or contributes a lot to what makes us, you know, tick psychologically. I don't know, that seemed pretty obvious thing to say, but I said it anyway.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting, and it's kind of worth like touching on these filmmakers, because they all have different perspectives on what cinema is and what's important to them, and they also have different skill sets. Like I said, Jim Jarmusch films are not really ones where you can, if you want to, you can go in and get really nitty gritty with the, you know, visual metaphor. But just knowing the guy's background and knowing what he's skilled at, that's not really where his attention is being drawn. I don't even know if he had anything to do with those patterns my sister was looking at, because that's not his forte. You know, that might have just been the art director, like telling the actress, okay, you're going to paint little white circles, you know. Who knows? But like the thing with his movies is, as I said, it's the dialogue, and it's kind of the setting plays an important role as well. Like, Coffee and Cigarettes, I'll talk about that a little bit more. Like, that's a film I've seen of his where it's essentially an anthology film, and it's just people talking over coffee and cigarettes. And each story is in a different location, completely different from one another, and it's almost like little mini slices of life. The one bit I remember from that film that was my favorite was the one with Steve Buscemi. It's in a 50s diner, 50s themed diner, and these two black customers walk in and get into an argument with Steve Buscemi over whether or not Elvis was racist. And that's it. That's the whole story. That's that whole chapter of that section of the movie. And it's just kind of funny because like the Steve Buscemi's character is a big Elvis fan, and he's like, no, he wouldn't be racist. He wouldn't have done that. And they're like, oh, but what about the time he? And it's just kind of funny, you know. Like you don't need to get like super analytical about it or anything. It's just normal people having a conversation about whether or not Elvis is racist. And his films are a lot of that. And there's also, again, intention put into it. Like Dead Man is another great one where that's like his cowboy movie. It's, you know, the typical cowboy film is like the lone stranger comes into town and shoots the burglar or whatever, like, and, you know, is the hero. Wherein Jim Jarmusch's Western, a very weak and timid city slicker walks into town, immediately gets shot by a criminal, and then for the rest of the film is slowly dying while a Native American gives him his burial rites.
Oh, that sounds, sad.
But a lot of it is like the person with the most dialogue in that film is the Native American, and he put a lot of care. He hired, you know, it is an actual Native actor who's playing the role, and there's a lot of attention and care put into the dialogue. And if I remember correctly, there's even whatever Native American language the character speaks is spoken in the film. So again, it's like the language used is what you should focus on with Jim Jarmusch films. Again, not telling you how to read his films, just it's kind of the thing that he puts the most attention and care into, and the thing I feel like that is much more like you could really dive into. I'm not a literature guy. I am not a poetry guy. I do like the poems, but unfortunately I can't really dissect them too much. But a fun question for you. What was your favorite poem?
Oh, okay. So the Matchsticks one, I really like that one, not necessarily for the poem, but I like the fact that it was a love poem and you were kind of just like, why? And then it comes back later when she says, oh, did you mention how the thing on the matchsticks looks like a megaphone? Like, to me, it was kind of like they get each other. And because of that scene, that's why that's my favorite poem.
It's funny. I was going to say the same poem, not for the same, well, sort of for the same reasons. It really, I agree with you. I feel like it's a very good, and even just the details, like the way he's talking about all of the details on the match and stuff. And it's like, it's also very personal to their relationship. In our house, we use primarily, I forget what it's called, the blue tip, whatever.
Ohio blue tip.
Ohio blue tip. So yeah, like I felt like that was kind of another angle to the romance, is that it's like, you know, it's our household's brand of matches. I like that one too. The little girls one was very nice. I think that might have been my sister's. I never asked her which one was her favorite. I also, for my second favorite, I will, just for the sake of having a different poem shouted out, I will say I liked the one about the fourth and fifth dimensions.
That one was interesting because I actually never thought about that way when he was like, and we learned there's a fourth time. And I'm like, and it was kind of like one of those, oh, yeah.
Did you not learn that in school? I learned that in physics.
Okay, no, I did not learn that time. I mean, I knew it was a fourth dimension, but I never put it together with the first three dimensions are length, width, and depth. I never put it together that way. I mean, I learned the fourth dimension was time.
And then the fifth one, I'm trying to remember. I don't know. We got up to like, it was in like my physics class we got, because once we got into quantum physics, we were talking about that stuff, and I think we got up to like 7 dimensions or something. It's crazy.
Well, like, listen, when
like
when it was in physics, I was like barely passing physics. Okay, so I did what I had to pass. I didn't understand, but I did know that time was the fourth dimension.
You did what you had to pass.
Okay, that needs to not be taken out of context, please.
Oh boy.
That sounds really bad. Basically what I mean is I did essentially the bare minimum of work that I had to pass, because I did not understand what was being talked about there. But like I said, I did know time was the fourth dimension, but I never put it together with length, width, and depth being the first, second, and third dimensions, because I've never heard it phrased that way. But when he did that, he connected all four. I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Anyway.
Well, that was my second favorite poem, but and it sounds like it was an educational experience for you.
Okay, okay. But from
No,
my
and
understanding, oh, go ahead.
well, I forgot if I mentioned this, but so the guy who wrote most of the poems in the film, Ron Paget, like I
Yeah,
think I mentioned this earlier, but so he comes from the New York School of Poetry. So not only is that like his most like what he was interested in poetry wise, but like he featured the type of poetry that he likes. Like, and you know, we talk about like, oh, Paterson wrote that poem about his wife. No, well, yes, in context to the movie, but also it was written by this type of poet, you know, for the movie, which again kind of highlights like both of us were talking about how intimate the details were.
yeah,
And again, like this school of poetry goes with the talking directly to one other person rather than shouting from the rooftops.
yeah.
And that's actually kind of like thinking, you know, I didn't know that before. Yeah, I did the research after watching the film. So going back to that, it's like thinking of all the poems. It fits. I see where that's coming from. And it's interesting, like this idea, like they all, again, like we, even knowing that this whole school of poetry exists and that most of the poets who are published and are known in this like community all have like day jobs that are very mundane. Doctor is probably less mundane. The William Carlos Williams,
Yeah,
his job is
he was
probably
gonna be
a bit
okay
stressful.
if his poetry never took off.
For sure. But it is interesting, and it kind of goes back to what I felt like the meaning of this film was about, like how if you know, we look at these artistic endeavors as careers, like, oh, are you making it in this? And again, as I said, like for whether I'm doing a podcast or whether I'm like writing a song on my guitar or something, I'm not doing it because I expect anyone's going to hear it, you know, but I feel like there is a lot of pride and satisfaction that goes into that, you know, and I wish people thought of things that way, because like the more I see like with younger and younger people needing to like get attention on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, it is kind of sad because you never see people doing things for the sake of doing them anymore.
No,
you
then
know?
you just end up with people who lick toilet seats for clout.
I mean, that's kind of, oh, hey, let's derail a conversation into that. I mean, it does go into that. I mean, like when you look at a lot of the content that's created online nowadays, a lot of it is shock value and just trying to, you know, it's rare that you see someone doing something like writing poetry or a song. And I mean, oftentimes, some of the most talented people, like as someone who likes like guitar and stuff, I'll watch people doing covers of songs on YouTube and stuff, and oftentimes they'll have like maybe 1,000 views or something. Sometimes if it's like a really popular song, usually it'll do a little bit better.
Right.
But it's like, you know, the people who actually display a good deal of talent often kind of go overlooked.
Right.
And it makes me kind of sad because it's like, yeah, you lick a toilet seat and you'll get 20 million views in 3 days.
Yeah.
But, you know, put on a play production, you know, in your town and maybe 20 people will show up.
Right.
It really does kind of make you wonder where we're setting our values, but not to get preachy. It's just interesting. And I, as I said, like, I feel like this film is almost good soul food or food for thought for that kind of thing. Because I feel like
it was just so comfy to be with. Like, you know, I talked about how I watched it when I was in my bed, wrapped in my blankets. It was cold. It was colder, and I was warm. And I was watching it, and I had some candles. And the every so often I'd hear my pigs squeak, and it was like the perfect setting to watch it because, like I said, this movie's basically like a nice cup of tea. You know, when you're not feeling well, and it's like the most delicious and comforting thing ever.
For sure.
Now, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it, but didn't you tell me that we had a, you know, reunited couple in this movie? I could be wrong. Now I'm doubting it.
Did we? Like, I don't
Didn't
think
you tell me that the boy and the girl are the ones from Moonrise Kingdom?
Yes. Oh my goodness. I'm glad you remembered that. I totally forgot until you brought that up.
I was so waiting for that scene to come up.
Yes. So anyway, forgot about. Oh my gosh, that was years ago.
How
I wonder if I even said that on the
embarrassing
podcast
since we reviewed that movie.
I wonder if did I say that in the review? Okay, so anyone who hasn't, you should listen to that review. Wink, wink. It's a good one. But yeah, so I forget if you found that out or I found that
You found
out.
that out and you told me about it.
Okay, well, so the in the film, if you haven't already seen the film before listening to this podcast, there's a bit early on in the film where there are two like teenagers talking about anarchy and how they're like, "Ooh, we're the anarchists in this town" and stuff. It's like one of the first people that Paterson sort of eavesdrops on his bus. Those two teens on his bus are the same actors from Moonrise Kingdom as the little Boy Scout and his girlfriend.
Oh my god, they were so cute there, and it was kind of funny seeing them pop up again in this movie.
Did you
And
make a note of that? Even when I was watching it, I forgot. It's also funny how I remembered as soon as you brought it up, and now it's all coming back to me. But it's funny, even when I was watching the movie last week,
to quote Celine Dion,
watching that scene, I didn't even think.
it's all coming back to him now. But
Seriously.
no, because I remember, I think in our Moonrise Kingdom review, you said, "Oh yeah, and they make an appearance in another movie that maybe we'll talk about later." I think you say that, and then afterwards, you're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, they showed up in Paterson. Here's the scene real quick," and you sent it to me. So I knew the scene was coming up. I don't know why I always had that remembered, but I did. Because it actually, and I think the reason why it popped out to me again is because I think some of my favorite things were some of the conversations that the bus people were having, and I'll get more into that in a minute. But yeah, they show up, and it was kind of interesting to see what they look like now. She does not.
Yeah, she looks way different.
She looks very different. I could still kind of see the dorky looking kid in the way the guy looks now, but she looks very different. So I don't know if it was a combination of makeup and hair, or if she just
I'm gonna sound like I'm body shaming. I don't like. I think part of it is like I think she might have put on a little bit of weight, and not in an unhealthy way. Not in a like. She had a different facial kind of. It was more round.
Her face is more round. Like not
as
in a bad way.
like a 12,
she's also glowing.
Yeah, as like a
So
exactly, and that's what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't mean like, oh no, she's put no, whatever. Like, as a 12-year-old girl, she was kind of skinny, and I think like going through puberty, she just like put on some weight or something. Because I know what you mean. Like, and
well, yeah, I think different. The other kid looks skinnier.
Yeah,
he looks skinnier, but I think it's just because of the way his hair falls. It's very distinctive, so it was very easy for me to see that face.
Also, the fact that he wears glasses made him a little bit more recognizable. But yeah, no, I wonder if Jarmusch was a fan, or if that just was like completely coincidental.
There is no way that was coincidental. I'm sorry.
He must have liked the film or something like that.
But what other thing I was going to say, I was talking about, is the conversations that these people have on the bus. They were just kind of just funny to just listen to. Like, for example, I love how they are like, yeah, we're the anarchists. Yeah. By the way, I'll see you after class at 10. Bye. I don't, just the juxtaposition, the juxtaposition of them talking about anarchy and, all the stuff that anarchy brings about. And then they're just like, okay, let me go follow my schedule now.
Because you could probably tell they were like freshmen in high school.
Well,
Like, it was just kind of funny.
Their characters were very much, I'm 13 and this is deep.
Right? Yeah, they're like wearing their punk t-shirts and their combat boots and stuff, and they're like, yeah.
And then I loved also the conversation with the two guys. the two that was just so funny because it was just I think all of these were just commentaries on things. I think this one was just like a commentary on masculinity because he's talking about it. Clearly this guy was too intimidated by this girl to go out with her or stuff, but he's like, oh yeah, and then there's silence, and the other guy, it sounds like he makes up this story about this other girl. And then he's like, but yeah, I had to be at work in the morning, so I had to turn down. So, it kind of just to me sort of just sounded like, like just like these gentle sirs on a subreddit or something. It was the funniest thing ever because they were just totally just like making up half this story as they went.
There was also those two little boys who were talking about, was it Muhammad Ali? They were talking about a sports or something like that. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I know. I remember the two boys. I don't remember what they were talking about though.
I feel like it was sports, and that's probably why I don't remember it. But yeah, like honestly, if you liked that sort of thing, you might want to check out more of Jim Jarmusch's movies, because I'd say the stuff on the bus was probably the closest to what his movies are like. You know, because a
Yeah.
lot of it's like little Coffee and Cigarettes is a perfect example, because that's literally all the movie is just a bunch of like different stories with people eating, drinking coffee, and smoking cigarettes and talking about different random topics. But yeah, a lot of it is just kind of these weird, mundane sort of conversations about different things. So if that piques your interest, you might want to watch some more of his other movies, because that's sort of what they are.
I just kind of liked how he was just like, he was doing exactly what we were doing. We were just hearing part of a conversation, and then we were forming a judgment on what's going on. Same as probably the characters doing, just based on a little bit what
Yep.
we heard. Like I said, like with those two guys, I was like, yeah, these guys were never approached by women at all. This is all what happened in their head.
Well, I think anytime you work like a job that's boring enough where and like with the public, like a bus driver, like I know some of my days in retail, I've definitely overheard some weird conversations. So it's like it's kind of relatable in that sense.
Listen, when I worked at JCPenney, I had to tell this mother that no, having red and black shoes from Nike does not mean your son is in a gang. I still remember that she was worried, these red and black Nikes. Not just one part, she's just like, oh, isn't that what the gangbangers are? And I'm like, not that I'm aware of, unless you know something I don't. But she was all freaked out about this.
Was it a white woman?
Actually, no, it was a Hispanic woman.
Oh, okay.
But I was just like, girl, what is going on in your life?
At least she's trying to know. At least she's trying to like be aware of what her son's doing. But yeah, that is kind of funny. Although that what I mean, that's not really eavesdropping though. That's more
That's
being
true.
that's being asked a direct and stupid question.
Yes.
I'm sure like when you worked at JCPenney, maybe you were restocking something and you heard two people talking about something just batshit crazy, like in an aisle over where they can't see that you're stocking something.
Oh, you mean like how this one woman mentioned how her tampon fell out while she was in the dressing room? Yeah, that's weird.
Exactly.
And I'm just thinking, I hope you picked that up.
No, that's your job.
That is not my job. I didn't even have a dressing
That is-
room in my department.
That is your job. You are my personal servant because I am here shopping at JCPenney. How dare you say otherwise?
My God.
You No, but yeah, there's that. Here is a question I wanted to pose.
Ooh,
This
pose
was
away.
something. So, we've already talked about like what's important about like maybe not thinking about how other people are going to perceive your art, and the importance of maybe, you know, just doing it for the sake of enjoying it. But before I had even watched this movie or anything, I like was going into this episode with sort of a question that will probably end up closing out this episode, unless you have some other things you want to talk
Okay,
about.
I do have one
But,
other to talk about, but go ahead.
Okay. No, go. Let's talk about everything you want to talk
Okay.
about, and then we'll close out with my question, and then we'll review. We'll say what our score is for the film.
Okay, so when his what is it called? When his notebook gets eaten.
Oh yes, of course. For those following along, the big climax of the film, sort of the pre-climax, the lowest point of our hero's journey in this film is when his poetry book is, you know, shamelessly eaten alive by our antagonist Marvin the dog.
Marv. See, I told you dogs are evil. I've always said this. If that had been a cat,
Marvin's
the cat
cute.
wouldn't have eaten eaten the book.
Marvin's cute. I'd give him lots of scritches.
Marvin is a psycho.
But what were you? What about the dog eating the book?
So at first, I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting, because I went through several scenarios in my head. I'm like, okay, maybe he knows he has to copy the book this weekend, so that's a duplicate book. Not like a duplicate, but just like another book that looks like it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that way he wouldn't have to copy it. But no, that wasn't the case. It was actual poetry. But
Here's a question.
yeah.
Do you think Marvin did it, or do you think that Paterson gave it to Marvin?
That's interesting, because that was my other question that I was going to ask. Because he has no intention of releasing his poetry, because like as we talked about with I can't even pronounce his name. You know, it's personal. It was just, you know, really for him to, work things out or do something in his head or, just whatever. It was just his way of artistic expression. And he never really seems to, like, once he finishes a poem, he doesn't seem to, like, go back to it. You know what I mean? It's not like he's like, it's not like there's any, like, there weren't like really scenes where he goes back and is like, okay, wow, this sounds really
that's
good.
something I liked about the film, though, is that it did show his process. Like, there were times when you'd think that a poem was finished and you're like, oh, that was short, and then he'd go on to another poem, and then like later in the day he'd go back to the first poem. And I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh, that is kind of how people really work on things. Like, maybe you have an idea and you move on to something else, but then you go back to that. Like, I thought that was kind of neat how it felt very real, how he was working on the poems. And, like, for instance, at the very beginning, like, on his way to work, he writes, like, 4 lines of the Matchstick poem.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, that's it. And then, like, on his lunch break, he repeats those 4 lines and then adds on to them, and you're like, oh, okay, he wasn't finished. So I thought that was kind of cool how you, like, were on the journey with him, like, as he was writing the poems.
That
like,
is
you
true.
watched him work it out.
But I guess I mean, like, when he finished the poem and he moves on to
yes.
He does. So then I was like, okay, so he really has no, like, I guess, use to keep, once the book is filled, to really keep them. So then I was like, okay, maybe he left it on purpose. But then afterwards, it's almost like he seems to kind of like lose his mojo for a day until he has that discussion with the guy visiting. Oh my God. And I know it's not Okinawa. That's in Hawaii. Or is it Okinawa?
No. Okinawa, I think, is where he said he was from. Okay. Or no, Osaka, I think, is where he said he was from.
Is it Osaka?
I think it was Osaka.
Okay.
Okinawa is like the tropical area in Hawaii or in Japan, but I think he said Osaka.
Maybe, I think basically it's a man from Japan. Yeah, it starts with an O and it's a man from Japan. He's pretty cool. And then
that rhymes,
right? Like the first line of that little girl's poem. It's almost like he's internally depressed about the loss of his book. And it's almost like he doesn't really like want to like write, because even when he told the little girl, oh yeah, I do a little poetry too. Everybody knows he does poetry, but then all of a sudden when that guy asks him if he's a poet, he's like, no, I'm not. Oh, and then he mentions his favorite author, his favorite poet at first, and he's like, yeah, I've heard of the name. So it was almost like he was like off of his game, or he was like, maybe like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be doing poetry or something weird like that. And then it's almost like he gets it back once he gets the new notebook back. So that's kind of why I was like, maybe it wasn't on purpose.
Right. I kind of feel I felt the same way first time I saw this, and I kind of forget that in a few years when I haven't seen this in a while, I'll probably forget again. But every time that happens, I'm kind of like, did he though? Like, and that's sort of the other positive angle to doing art for art's sake. Yeah. Is that if you write every day, I feel like people get this way about a lot of things where they feel like if they don't do it for a long period of time that they're going to forget how to do it.
Yeah.
But there's nothing more freeing than if you do something every day, your entire past collection of work could be burned, and there's nothing that's holding you back from just writing better stuff, or painting better stuff, or what, like if my guitar was stolen tomorrow, I would be sad that guitar cost a couple $100, but I'm not going to lose my ability to play a different guitar, and
what if I painted it with black and white diamonds?
Then it just would look cool. But not my SG, damn it. I love that design. Anyway, but if you paint every day, you'll probably have a buttload of paintings, and it's kind of like, and some of them you might want to keep for sentimental reasons or something, but it's like if you gave them away, or if you, I don't know, recycled all the materials and just got rid of it, it's like, would it matter? And that's like more of a philosophical or like whatever question. I'm sure it's also very personal to each person. I'm sure some people would be much more devastated if all of their past work were destroyed. But I do think that there is sort of a positive angle to it if you're not doing it to publish it or get famous off of it. that it's like it really is kind of like easy come, easy go. Like you'll still be able to write things in the future or do whatever art it is.
See, and
You
that's
know,
kind of how I felt with it. Well, his reaction at first was like easy come, easy go, sort of. He seemed pretty chill about it, except for the fact when he tells Marvin, "I don't like you," and then, like I said, that whole interaction at the park, that was kind of weird.
yeah, no, I think the intention was that he was supposed to be put out and that guy was supposed to kind of motivate him again. And also like I'm sure it was also maybe kind of cool to see someone who knows what he was about. You know, he was a fan of the same poet, like he has his, William Carlos Williams Paterson book in Japanese, and he's going to all the landmarks talked about in the book, like the waterfall that powers the city and all this other stuff. And maybe it was also kind of like, I'm not alone, here's this other person from a completely different part of the world who knows about my interests, my favorite poet, my hometown, and also writes poetry in his free time. I think maybe it was also like, kind of snapping him out of his depression a little bit and just being like, is it more important to have poems that you've already written, or is the creative process more important?
Right.
Well,
I also love the guys like calls him out. he, I loved his aha that he would do. It was like, boy, I see you. I know what you're about.
Also with the whole, as we said earlier in the review, as like the whole other man in his wife's life, she quickly chose Paterson over the dog. She was like, no, you are sleeping outside. You have been a bad boy. How dare you eat my
like
husband's...
all dogs are garbage animals.
You saying it, not me. Remember, guys, cancel T, not me.
God.
I love dogs.
Okay.
We've talked about. I forget if we brought this. Your hatred of dogs is so funny. I have another friend who feels the same way about cats.
I just think dogs get too much credit and get too much of a pass.
Says someone like cats get posted so much on the internet. It's so funny.
Oh my god, cats only show up in movies when you want to make things comical about their death. When cats die, it's apparently funny. When dogs do, everyone like loses their minds.
I am pet neutral. I like all cute, cuddly animals, and I find people like you and a friend who hates cats the same way you hate dogs funny, because it's like how can you have so much hatred in your heart for an innocent animal? It's so weird.
Let me rephrase. I don't hate dogs. I hate the way dogs are portrayed.
As dogs?
No, they're people like basically treat them like they're the second coming. It was like, my god, it's
as I
just
said,
an animal.
I find, because for every person like you, there's someone who feels the same way about cats or guinea pigs, and I just find the whole thing so funny because it's like,
how dare you?
How dare who?
Uncle Whiskey didn't mean that. You didn't hear that. Go back to sleep.
I said people, not myself, and I guarantee there are.
But they don't.
In fact, in Peru, they eat guinea pigs.
Okay, my God! Shh. He's trying to scare my babies.
Anyway, I find weird pet rivalries weird and hilarious, and there's someone out there who hates one type of animal, and I just get to sit back and be like, wow, you're being weird. But anyway, was there anything else before I get into my final question before we rate?
I don't think so. This is just like an enjoyable movie. Like when I was in Savannah, I mentioned that this is the film that we're going to do to my friend. We're going to refer to him as the teacher. Very close friend of mine, the teacher. He said, this is one that his mother loves. His mother is an artist. I think she paints. She has like her own studio, but she loved this movie. I think they may have seen it for the first time at the SCAD Film Festival. I could be wrong though. But yet she loves this movie. So he knew exactly what I was talking about when I mentioned this movie. So it does have some far-reaching in the artistic community.
Well, the final question before we rate the film, as I said, this film talks a lot about creativity and, having that as a part of your routine throughout the day. The philosophical question I'd like to pose to you is, what is an artist?
I think we're all artists in our own way. I don't think there's a way to because I feel like to define artist, you have to define art, and I feel like it's very difficult to define art. I feel like people want to define art, and I think the reason people want to be able to define art is to monetize it. Everyone just ignore the fire over at Whiskey's house.
Oh, I
Um,
hate that you can hear that.
it's
Also,
it's okay.
we'll cut this out, Andy. Hopefully you can. It's just on my end of things, but
Basically, I think my whole
yeah.
thing is you can't really define what an artist is except as a very broadly as a creator of something. It doesn't even have to be of a tangible thing. You can be a creator of speech, you can be a creator of sound. I think we're all artists in a way. And like I said, the reason why I can't define it further is you have to define what art is. And I feel like art is very difficult to define because what we perceive as art, it changes on a per person basis. Like three people could look at the same thing. Two of them could say, "Yes, this is fantastic art," and somebody looks at this. What do you mean this is art? This doesn't look like anything. Um, and like I had a, I'm always cautious to say everything is art, because if everything is art, then nothing is art. But I had a professor who was trying to say that no, art is a very specific thing. It's not just, it can't just be anything. And I kind of always disagreed with her. I respect her, but I disagree with her on that because the only time people really ever want to define what art is for either the purpose of gatekeeping or the purpose of monetizing it. So that is my very long-winded answer to my question of what an artist is, and hopefully it was as satisfying as those really bad episodes of Law and Order where there's no conclusion and it just goes to executive producer Dick Wolf.
Well, it sounds like you haven't taken a lot of philosophy classes. The way it works is there is no right answer. It's just about like my favorite is like Socrates asking people what the definition of a horse is.
Mm-hmm.
It's so my definition of an artist versus someone who does art is that it's someone, and this again, this is my interpretation. Anyone, feel free to argue, argue with me, or argue in the comments if you're listening to this on YouTube or whatever. But my definition of an artist is someone who practices their art regardless of whether anyone cares, whether it's going to, make them money or anything. They just have an insatiable need to make something. Perfect example would be someone like Van Gogh, who painted despite being poor and their career never taking off. Or a more modern example that I find kind of funny is Stephen King,
Right.
because he just writes. Like he's even said, it's like if people stopped publishing my work, I'd still be writing. Like there'd just be closets in my house full of like finished books just because I can't stop. Like it's like an addiction or whatever. Like so, in a general sense, whether you want to consider his books art or not, that's your opinion. But in my definition of an artist, he is an artist because whether or not he's selling his books or anything, he will write books, whether anyone sees them or not. He just can't stop writing. And I feel like that is like what separates someone who just does art like as a hobby versus someone who is like an artist, capital A.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll pose that to our listeners out there. What do you think an artist is? What do you think separates an artist from someone who practices art? And is there a difference? Like T said, are we all artists? Does it matter how frequently you do things? Does it matter, like the way I'm separating it is, as I said, it's like you just need to do it. We all are capable of creating great art, but I feel like if I had to like philosophically define the idea, it's almost just like this compulsion.
My favorite definition of not artist, but art is from David Bowie. When he appeared in the Atlantis SquarePants episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, he says, art is what happens when you dream. When you let yourself dream, I think is what he says. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that. I don't know how you feel about that, but That's how I feel about it.
I mean, I don't know. This is sort of a non-answer to me.
That's what do you mean? That's a non-answer.
I mean, what does that mean? Like when you dream? I don't know. It almost sounds like something just kind of like airy fairy to say on like a kid's cartoon program.
Well, it's
also
immediately followed by.
He didn't.
I remember Squidward gives this like, very technical answer as to what art is, and David Bowie's like, not even close, and then he says that.
Squidward is someone who has been scammed by art schools. Poor man. Anyway, going like
really quick, because you just made me think of this with artists. So I went to the Flannery O'Connor house when I was in Savannah, and oh my God, Flannery O'Connor would not agree with us on what an artist is or what art is.
I don't even know who Flannery O'Connor is. She is
a celebrated writer of short stories. Back when she was alive, she won like several awards for her short stories. They were usually very gruesome and brutal, but hilarious. They usually had some sort of moralistic meaning to them or whatever. But she was very
sounds like a hardcore Christian.
She was a Catholic person, but she was hilariously weird. But she would had commentary about basically all popular fiction. Like she thought, I think she thought like F. Scott Fitzgerald was trash, and so basically she was just like, and she one of her famous quotes is, "There's many of a bestseller that could have been stopped by a good English teacher."
I love how petty she is, but she also sounds like an insufferable bitch.
She
I
wrote
I would like hanging out with her.
When she was one of she had in her kid when her books as a kid. She would write in them, "This book sucks." Like she wrote that in her book when she was a kid. Or like one of them says, "This is the worst thing I've read since Pinocchio." And so she was very, very,
egotistical for sure.
Maybe I think that's egotistical. I was at our house. I bought some of her books. I want to read what they are, because her short stories are supposed to be just excellent. But I just thought that was so funny. I've never seen somebody be openly that petty before.
I love people who disrespect the classics or have a fresh take on it, but when it almost to me comes across like she might think that she's better than them, and that's where you lose me. I don't like people who think that they're better than God, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I prefer humble artists. So she sounds a bit like an insufferable bitch, but I don't know.
And we mean that in the nicest way.
Because again, if you're calling F. Scott Fitzgerald a hack, that is kind of hilarious. But it's like, are you calling him a hack because you think you're the best thing since sliced bread? Because then you lost me.
Yeah. So,
but anyway, what would you, out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea, what would you rate this film?
I would give this film a 3.8 pitchers of sweet tea out of 4.
Oh my goodness.
Just because.
Well, so I'm going to be more fair. This is one of my personal favorite films. But because of the way it is, I can't necessarily recommend it to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this would be like a 3 or a 3.5. This is a great mood piece. This is something I love to put on when I'm chilling. It's very relaxing. It's kind of like you said with putting your candles on.
Yeah.
But because I know that some people will find this horribly boring.
Yeah.
And as like trying to recommend this, I will caution you, you might hate this. If you are not an artistically inclined, if you're someone who is more into the entertainment aspect of films, or if you're someone who just is incapable of catching a vibe, you probably won't like this. So,
that's true. But I'm rating, I am rating for me.
There you go. If I were rating for me, like I said, 3.5. But if I'm like just generally as a critic, like this just isn't going to be for everyone. So I'm gonna give it a 2.5. But I love this film more than I'm rating it. So just keep that in mind. And I do encourage you, especially if for some reason you've listened to this whole episode and you still haven't seen the film, check it out. Especially if you've gone this whole way. Like if anything we've talked about sounds interesting. This is luckily a film you cannot really spoil because nothing happens in it.
Yeah.
You can't spoil a vibe.
Except for the book. being eaten.
Yeah. Or like we did spoil things like what happened to the mailbox, but again, it's kind of, what it reminds me of. It's like if you've heard the ending to a story that you haven't read and then gone back and read it anyway, it feels so much more different when you're reading it yourself.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite films is Apocalypse Now, and I never had to read Heart of Darkness in school for whatever reason. And I didn't read it until like years ago. I think it was like 2018 or so.
Right.
And part of the reason I held off on it was because it's like, well, I know what happens, but when I actually read it, it just hit different.
Right.
So if you haven't seen this film and you're listening to this right now, I will tell you that even though we have spoiled a good amount of it, it will hit different seeing it yourself.
Yeah. No, it definitely will. I will say there's one other thing I should remember. I forgot to bring this up, but the reason I didn't give it 4 and I gave it 3.8 is because the music in it, some of it felt tonally mismatched. Because I don't know, some of it that sounded like it was like from like a thriller. It was weird. It was kind of like pulsating and stuff, and I was like, I'm not feeling the vibe with this movie with this score. I don't know how you felt about it, but there's some of it that I was just like,
it kind of blends into the background. The score isn't bad, but it's not something I would say is the film's strong suit. Most of the time, it's very like,
mellow.
If it was kind of pulsating, I would guess that maybe it was happening during a scene like maybe when the bus breaks down. The fact that I can't really think of when it might have been happening. Again, maybe next time I see the film, I'll pay more attention to it, but it usually just sort of blends into the background. It's so I don't know. For me, I'm not going to disagree because I can't really say that the music is particularly memorable. So in the same way that it didn't hit the right way for you, I would say it didn't really hit anything for me because it just sort of blended in. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If this is your first time listening and you enjoyed, feel free to look at our backlog of episodes. We've got all sorts of great stuff. Just did some spooky movies last month for Halloween. Almost done with the year, so hang with us a little bit, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is produced by Alejandro Castillo, edited by Andy Reisfeld, and features original artwork by Ace Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks, and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.